Okay, this video is going to be my attempt to describe or explain how hip hop music changed from the early 90s to where we are today. I'm not going to get into the 2010s and the 2020s. This is basically going to be the 90s, early 90s, where I have experience, and then into the 2000s, and what I think are some of the elusive things that people are having a hard time finding. And some of it came about because I was thinking about my experience in what we were recording. Let's just say starting for me in like 93, 4, when I really got heavy duty into recording and mixing hip hop. And one of the songs that came to mind was Sweet Love by Method Man. I mixed that, and I believe I recorded some of it, but I know the entire scenario of mixing that track and how far we drifted, and I'm including myself. We all kind of evolved, and that's part of what happens with production of any sort, is that people's tastes change. You're chasing like a little bit of a hit here or there that just happened, that maybe dripped another drip in the direction that is getting away from, or got away from, where we really got things rolling. So aside from the occasional, I'm going to talk about kick drums a lot in this one. Aside from the occasional pure drum machine kick, I would say, and I recorded at least 200 hip hop tunes. I would say 50 of them probably came out. 150 never saw the light of day or got shelved. And I'm talking about major release hip hop tunes. Full albums, 20 songs for a 10-song album. It adds up. So when I'm saying 200, I'm probably being nice, if that's what I said. I was making these recordings back when I wasn't the only one wearing Drakkar Noir like I am now. But that aside, here's what was going down. The kick drums were coming from vinyl, sampled into SP1200s from typically a bad turntable, or through a bad mixer, like an old Newmark that was all beat up. Who knows what the stylus was even like? A lot of times they were rented, the whole thing. SP1200, MPC 60, MPC 62. So they were sampling off of vinyl, as you know. But here's where things start to evolve, and I'm going to try and explain it. The vinyl they were sampling, those records, those kick drums were real kick drums that were recorded onto like let's just say a 60s album that they found this drop on, or 70s, okay? The way those things were recorded were very, very organic, natural recordings. And when I say that, I mean a microphone in a kick drum or in front of the head, and a large diaphragm microphone, most likely, but it could have not been that. Recorded with next to no compression, if there was any compression. There weren't inline compression on the consoles that people were using at the time, and no one was compressing to tape. No one was really EQing to tape. That was very frowned upon. They may have EQ'd a little bit in the mix, but you basically got the drum sound from moving the microphone around, changing the beater that the drummer was using on his kick drum. Oh, we want a wood beater this time, or we want a felt beater this time. But anyway, those kicks were then chosen by hip-hop producers and or artists who decided, like, I found a kick, I'm going to sample that. Sometimes they would put it on a cassette first so that they could eventually sample it. So you already had a degradation right there. But where those kicks were recorded to tape, to 2-inch tape or 16-track 2-inch or 16-track 1-inch, those were mixed as final records by mix engineers back then who didn't even look at mixing as, certainly not an all-day process. They would mix an album in the day that they recorded it, because those were live recordings. Those were real recordings of performances. So those mixes were, while tremendous, they were not heavily processed. So that kick drum, while it went to tape, and engineers back then were very big on not trying to build up tape generation loss. So when the band was ready to record the thing, that's when they would record it. And then you didn't have 10,000 hours of a mix being played on the 24-track machine or the tape machine. These things were bing, bang, boom. Those mixes, the mix bus was not a processed situation. There was no, I'm going to put, certainly no L2, L1 or no limiters. There may have been occasionally maybe a Fairchild at some point for some really low-key compression on the whole mix. There was definitely no limiters. Then that got sent to mastering, and the mastering engineer dealt with limiting it or compressing it just enough to make it acceptable for vinyl, which was the only goal of those 60s and 70s records. There was no CD. There was no digital. There was no multi-band compression, multi-band limiting, multi-band. There wasn't even really multi-band EQ in the sense that we have it now. So as organic as it could get, that's where those kicks started from. Then the guys started sampling it. I'm going to cut to 94 or 93. They're sampling those things. And when we were getting our hands on the samples coming out of the drum machine, i.e. the MPC or the SP1200, we were not recording those things with heavy processing. It was like, get their sound to tape, run it through the console, send a level to the 24-track machine, MPEX 456, hit it hard, hit it not so hard. A lot of the guys didn't know what they were doing. They weren't hitting it hard. And a lot of the guys didn't know what they were doing. They were hitting it too hard. The limiting that happened from tape compression or 24-track machine compression was a sort of a thing, but not a crazy thing. Then the mixes came about, and I can tell you I'll talk about the Sweet Love tune from Tikal 2000 Method Man. I know I mixed that on a vintage Neve that was formerly Bruce Swedian's, and the Hit Factory had purchased it. And I was in Studio E at the time, it was called. And that thing had no compression on the individual channels. It just had EQ. And the room itself had maybe 6 compressors. It was like 2 LA2As, a couple 1176s. And I may have rented a 2254 Neve for the stereo bus. Maybe. The way a lot of guys got the attack out of the kick drums was by fine-tuning the trim at the top. Some guys like to leave it loose, so there was no point at the top. Some guys like to kind of like crank it up towards the edge where you would get that little bit of a attack thing. And it was like an artificial attack. It wasn't an attack that was in the recording. It was an attack that was developed from where you trimmed that sample. Then there were guys like me, I could use if I was mixing on an SSL, I would use the gate and the attack on that to get a little point at the top if I wanted it. If it was acceptable too to the producer. So what happened? those became the mixes, and those mixes were mastered by mastering engineers. As mix engineers, and I know several of them, we were all around each other all the time, and you know, the truth is that we all had the same, we shared, there was an assistant crew, like say at the Hit Factory, there was 12, 15 assistants. So anytime you went in on a daily basis, you would be with one or the other. And in conversation, you would say, like, what have you been working on? I was with Maserati mixing this thing. Oh, yeah, really? Would some information be passed around? Like, yeah, what's he using on the mix bus? Nothing. The SSL bus. Tony was a VR guy, from what I remember. There was no bus compression on the VR, so you had to rent something. I don't know what that would have been. Maybe a 2254. Nobody was really renting Vari Muse yet. Anyway, what happened was things started to progress. Things started to change a little bit. And of course, all it took probably was like one or two mixes with more compression to get some attention. And that started snowballing. And that kept snowballing all the way into the late 90s when the L1 started to appear, the limiter. And then you started getting into the thing where that became the sound. And then mix bus treatment started to become a thing with engineers, with the TC Electronics, what the heck was it called? With the Wizard, the finalizer. I had one and I used it. But what we would do was we would mix through things like that, but we would never send the mix with the limiter to the mastering engineer, like a Herb Powers. You just wouldn't do that. You'd turn the limiter off. You use the limiter for reference mixes in the studio to make a CD for somebody or make a cassette for somebody, because you wanted to get it to be a little louder at least, you know, and you didn't want to hear, oh, wow, why is my CD that you give me from the studio, you know, half the volume of the CD that I buy? You know, and then you come across something like the finalizer and you're like, man, this could make that louder. And then you had the Alesis CD recorder, and that had like a finalizing thing, that had like a bit of a processing thing, and it would bring the normalizing, and it would bring the volume up. So that's it, where things went off the rails. So if you're trying to get that sound, it would take some guts, for lack of a better word, because you would have to dig through crates or even CDs or whatever. You know, find the not remastered tracks where you want to pull those kick drums from. Sample them into your MPC or whatever, and try and not to do too much to them, because, you know, aside from a little filtering down or tuning down or, you know, darkening things up with the filter, that's about it. It was just a matter of finding the right kick drums and blending it into the right tune, and then having the right mixer mix it without all of the cooking that goes on where we've come to today. That's going to be it for this one. I'm going to go into more of that kind of stuff on another chapter, I'm sure, because I have some other ideas on, like, you know, where we all took part in kind of like destroying that sound. It was just an evolution. It was not like, oh, we all hate that sound. It was kind of like one of those things where no one even noticed it was happening until all of a sudden it happened.